So, again, thank you so much for inviting me. And our panel will be focusing on the policies of Iran in Africa. I'm the head of the Arabic field in broadcast channel 11. We have Citrinowicz. He's a senior researcher of INSS. Pardon me if I mispronounce your name. Revital, she is the PhD student from Tel Aviv Faculty of African Studies. And Matan Daniel, he's a researcher of the Center of Intelligence and Studies of Terrorism, named after Meir. Amit, thank you for being here. And in general, I would like to say one thing. Again, as an opening sentence, I think it's extremely fascinating, interesting, the Iranian involvement, the meddling into African business. In our Israeli understanding, we're so focused on Iranian meddling into the Middle East, closer to our home. You know, what is further away, we don't really pay attention to that. And I think it's also during the Iron Swords we saw that as well very much. Danny, I would like to start with you. Give us a little bit of a snapshot of the attempts of Iran to encroach in Africa. What was in the past and why we asked. First of all, thank you, Roy. I think we started this day with the head of this institute and the highlight you just gave us here. The Israeli need to look at the Iranian matter. It's not just the Middle Eastern matters. Again, we have some kind of very Israel-centric matter of Iran, and I think I also met it very often during my public service when you reach to the countries where there is no connection between Iran or nuclear or anything, and you tell them that Natanz for they look at you with this kind of overview of a diplomatic look, like, what do you want from me? It's boring, none of my business. But I think that what we learned today and what we try to do here during this meeting and this conference, a significant part of this learning is an attempt to present the Iranian threat in the sense of a highlight of more expanded narrative of Iran, not just the missiles, not just the nuclear weapons, but Iranian activity in the region. Just to explain to you how dominant they are in Africa, let's look at the African map and let's see the main attempts of Iran to get involved in Africa. Let's start with Dr. Abdi talked about Horn of Africa and Iran is very significant because of the geographic proximity to Horn of Africa, but definitely serves few operational and strategic targets. We can see here that the Iranian attempt to build a force as a maritime superpower in the Red Sea and elsewhere, but in operational, obviously, aspects. So Al-Shabaab and the aid to the Houthis and to Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and the political attempts and diplomatic attempts of Iran, and we can see them meddling into the business in Djibouti and Ethiopia, and of course the Sudanese affair, which is a significant matter for Iran. Sudan, in fact, from the moment, if you remember, was an important component of the contraband of weapons to Hamas, which will be relevant in the future as well. So the transition of Sudan to the Saudi bloc really hurt Iranians, and now they are benefiting from the war that we talked before about between the Sudanese military and the Decalo forces, the fast involvement forces of Decalo, in order to increase their presence. There are publications in the world about the munition that they sent, and they received a lot of it, and a significant step for them. But Iranians don't stop in Sudan. They go to the north. Diplomatic and political attempts to increase the connections with the Egyptians, to deepen the connection with the Egyptians on the foreign ministry level, and the willingness to change the name of Khalid Sambouli, the assassin of President Sadat, to Hassan Nasrallah Street in Tehran. Northern Africa, significant attempts. We also talked about that in Tunisia, trying to benefit from the Tunisian minority to expand their presence in Tunisia, in Northern Africa. So it's increasing the threat upon Morocco, that is, and Algeria as well, obviously. Morocco is perceived as a threatening country for the Iranian interest in Africa, so we can see here the Tunisian matter, and as you said, the Algerian story as well. The difference between Algeria and Tunis is that in Tunisia there is a Shia minority, and in Algeria there is none of it. also important difference. And Libya, the presence of Iranians in Tunisia is very much serves the interest to reinforce their presence in Libya. Personally speaking, they talked about the intent to block the Gibraltar Straits for the Israeli Sea, which is also aligns with the attempt of the leader to impose actually blockade upon Israel from the east and west and Sahel because of the evacuation of the West, France, and the Americans that left. We can see the increasing presence in areas such as Niger, uranium. We mentioned it in the Turkish context, but in Iranian, Burkina Faso, and Mali as well, very important countries in this sense. We can see it actually in the attempts to implement soft and hard power. Western Africa, majority of the Shia African population is in the Western Africa. The Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria. Nigeria is a very important country for the Iran. The largest Shia minority is in Nigeria. And when we talk about the proxy concept, you're familiar with, if you research Nigerian current politics, a significant movement in Nigeria that in many cases can become an actual proxy of Iranians in different contexts. And of course, the Cote d'Ivoire and Senegal as countries with a significant Shia minority. And two other important regions, we need to mention the Eastern Africa, Kenya and Tanzania. Kenya mostly in the context of economical development, but Tanzania because of the Shia minority that is very significant there, obviously. It's in the Eastern Africa, the largest Shia minority that exists, and two other connections that should concern us. Zimbabwe, country that is not that important in Israeli context, of course, but this country is being very much supported and supported by Iranian efforts. Even Raisi visited, and Uganda, a country that should concern us very much because of their connections with Museveni and Israel, and we also saw a meeting with Museveni people in Kampala, and the most important country for Iran in Africa is South Africa, which is a stronghold, strategic stronghold, economical and security one, and political one, and diplomatic one for the Iranians. And here we need to be very much concerned. I think that kind of reference what Sima mentioned, the American involvement, we need to follow up the attempts of the Americans to influence Southern Africans, because if the change will happen there, it will definitely be a positive change, because it will infringe the connection between the Iranians and South Africans. Main fields of interest for them, efforts using soft and hard power. Soft power is the aid, so military aid. Drones, we can see it in Sudan, we can see it also in Niger, and of course the soft power that Iran is trying to implement, a significant step for them, very much connected to Dr. Abdi's lecture in the beginning. It's ideological matter and ability to support the Shia aid, academic support, religious support, various religious institutes, and etc., because it allows Iran to obtain control of the continent through Shia minorities. I just want to highlight, because you do see here that Iranians during recent years increase their efforts. Do they try to enhance this meddling into the matters of Africa? Great question, really. I think that it comes in waves. Though the previous wave was of Ahmadinejad's wave that tried to break the walls of isolation with connections with Latin America and Africa. And Africa was very dominant during Rouhani period. It was very scarce involvement. Rouhani and Zarif, they put the chips on the table, mostly with the Europeans. But during Raisi, we saw a significant return, additional return. There was a visit of Raisi as we saw down the continent itself. We see significantly more expanded investments, economical investments, an attempt to bypass sanctions, but a political investment as well. Export of munitions from Iran, and of course, for them, it's a mature continent in this sense as a target to export. And it's an investment of the president that is supposed, as we may think, about the Western aspects because of nuclear interests, but it's actually very significant. No, they are transferring the interests from the European horizon to other possible allies. Africa is still quite appealing in their eyes. So we're about to see, to my opinion, a significant increase of Iranian activity in Africa when it comes to munitions. Obviously, we can see an increase. There were significant blows. If Maduro will fall in Venezuela because of the Americans, it will be a significant blow to the Iranians. So Africa will become more dominant in Iranian vision together with Asia. We need to look at the operational context. the presence of Iranian Navy, economical steps and political steps trying to break down this political diplomatic isolation of the Iranians. We'll see them very active there. Thank you, Danny. So before we'll start the discussion about the Saudis and the Iranians, can you explain to us how do you see African countries' interests and Iran? Can you address it? So the policy, the African policy is usually, it aspires, at least seemingly, to create some kind of local stability. What the African countries is trying to do vis-a-vis Iran is to get from them some advantages, economical advantages mostly, and the aspirations of the African countries in the end of the day. Let's talk about Nigeria, for example, for that matter, is to create some kind of unity, to create some kind of African cooperation, and they try to engage as much as they can other superpowers, Eastern Mediterranean countries, the way they try to do with other countries that are present in their territories in order to obtain benefits. I would like to highlight here the competition. You focus on Western Africa. There is significant competition between the Saudis and the Iranians, not just in context of hard power, actually more in the soft power, cultural influence. Well, so first of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to be here. It's such an important conference. This panel focused on the Iranian policy in Africa. Since the Islamic Revolution in Iran, Iran is searching for cooperation and strongholds in different countries in Africa. I would like to talk about its presence in West Africa. This is where they're not operating in a vacuum. When the world is looking at the Middle East, far away from the limelight, there is a struggle going on. This is a struggle that is not measured by occupation of territories, but ideological presence among the masses and among the religious scholars. It's a quiet war in West Africa. So this is not a battle of bombs and tanks, but of mosques and preachers, NGOs, schools. It's a Shia Iran and the Sunni Saudis are fighting for legitimacy, influence, and ability to reshape the Muslim identity in West Africa of hundreds of millions of people on the continent, in particular in West Africa. But the religion is not the only tool. Iran and Saudis, they all within themselves sign trade agreements, suggest they offer economical aid, they develop infrastructures in order to buy political sympathy and to break down the hegemonical diplomatic influence of their rivals. And Iran benefits from the sanctions, Western sanctions upon themselves to go to the global south. Iran is riding the anti-Western sentiment there, and they established their presence in countries such as Nigeria, Gambia, Mali, Senegal, through investments into agriculture, industry, and education. While at the same time they promote connections with Shia communities and Sufi communities and use various factors such as Hezbollah to build a force and presence of strategic nature in those countries. Iran is using Islamistic local movements as their own proxies to disseminate ideology of Shia. Saudi Arabia, from the other hand, operates at a more vast scope, investment into infrastructure, security cooperations with the local forces of the region, MIG-5, and Sahel force. The Saudis provide oil oil at a lower prices, they build mosques, and they do it in order to create a fruitful foundations of establishment of its position as the leaders of the Sunni world to stop and to block Iranian influence. Let's try to see how does it influence the West African countries. Such a rivalry and its impact upon the society in Western Africa is extremely deep and charged. It creates tension between Shia and Sunni, governmental involvement in religious disputes, distorted identity among the Muslim communities, and it turns this ideological battle into a source of political instability and the potential of explosion. Africa becomes an arena where the religious identity is being reshaped anew under the protectorate of Islamic superpowers that have global interests. There are no one that is winning. This war for West Africa goes on from the very first days of the Islamic Revolution in the corridors of universities, at the yards of the mosques, and in offices of the governments all over West Africa. Let's look at Nigeria, that is currently in the heart of ideological battle of West Africa. Nigeria is the highest populated country in Africa. It's about 240 inhabitants, with the largest, one of the largest Muslim communities on the continent. And during the few last years, it became a microcosm of religious rivalry and geopolitical rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The battle for Nigeria is not because of the significant number of Muslims in the country. Today, the assessment is it's 35% of the Nigerian population is Muslim, but because of the ethnic mosaic, colonial, complex history, and the tremendous economical potential of Nigeria. One should mention Nigeria today is one of the largest oil exporters in the world. And the film industry, for example, of Nigeria is the second largest in the world. The Hollywood follows it. So it's the second largest industry in the world because of its geostrategic location between the West Africa and its south. From a religious perspective, Iran managed to create in Nigeria a clear presence through the Islamic movement of Nigeria. Danny mentioned them before, IMN, headed by Sheikh Ibrahim El-Zakzaki. This movement that today includes 8 million of supporters operates to deepen Shia among the Muslims in Nigeria, while adopting the inspiration from Islamic Revolution in Iran. In addition to the religious activity of this movement, they have clinics dedicated to different everyday issues of Muslim health, family life, relationships, and etc. They have schools that they operate, newspapers and media stations, and various branches of universities. Al-Mustafa University, for example, in Iran, provides religious education in Nigeria. They provide economical support to the students and help and aid to travel to the city of Qom, where they are the headquarters of the university. Saudi Arabia, as a direct response, bring in resources to the extreme Sunni groups such as the Zala. They promote a very strict Salafist approach, and they resist Shia of IMN. They encourage local Sunni groups. They encourage connections with the Nigerian regime that do not hesitate to implement force against the Shia. And exposure of the depths of this conflict is being expressed in various events, such as the massacre that the government performed against the members of IMN, and afterwards the continuous arrest of Sheikh Zaki. From the economical point of view, Iran wishes to gain a forehost in the West Africa through energy, infrastructure, and agricultural agreements, aid in medicine, especially in the poverty areas where the culture of philanthropy of Iran is perceived as very positive and remunerating. The Saudis, from the other hand, operate in the same very regions while providing support to agricultural projects, investment in the field of education and religion, and the reinforcement of their presence through the Sahel Force and G5. That includes 5 different countries at the northern part of West Africa. Those forces operate against the terrorist forces, those countries, ridden with jihadi terrorist groups, especially of Al-Qaeda and of Boko Haram and others. From a social perspective, this rivalry between the Saudis and the Iranians reshapes anew the Muslim identity in the West African countries. The Shia that in the past were a negligible minority becoming a well-organized and connected community, while the Sunni are split into conservative factions, more moderate approach, while sometimes experiencing internal rivalries and conflicts. The religious tension, if I'm taking too long of your time, please let me know. No, it's all fine.
Okay.
The religious tension penetrates the civic society as well, the political system, and influence the foreign affairs of the countries that are very often choosing side based on various considerations of immediate profit and not necessarily the long-term interests on the national level. Okay? So thank you so much, Revital, for this fascinating review. Matan, I would like to ask you a question.
Matan, I would like to ask you, in continuation to what Revital said, what do I mean by that? Revital presented here in a fascinating way how West Africa is an arena of deep rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but the African continent is also a platform for collaborations between Islamistic Sunni organizations and different states, so it serves different interests. Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. I have the privilege to be the last speaker of the second panel. I hope that I won't repeat what the previous speakers said. I think that the clearer collaboration in recent years is Houthis and Shabab. There is something that was already mentioned, something which is not that clear between the Shia and the Sunni, and this weird connection. And Dr. Abdi spoke about it, about the non-natural connection. By the way, it's not only, it's in across Eastern Africa, connection between Sunni communities and Iran. The Iranian attempt to actually get involved everywhere they can. I don't want to repeat the collaboration that is probably taking place. But we know that weapons are sent to the Houthis from Iran. We know that there are, actually they go through a seaport in Djibouti, so on the face of it, it's not, we know that there are weapons shipments going through, that pass through Somalia, that trying to do that in a secretive way. And on the other hand, we know about Iranian weapons, which is quite a concern, because the abilities with more advanced weapons might make the difference and change everything in Somalia. So the ones who has studied this long-term conflict, you probably know that if Somalia will, for a while, will collapse. We already see proof of it, but even in Somalia there is a struggle there. Yes, in the previous panels they spoke about Turkish involvement of other countries, and the Americans, which we haven't addressed, they have a significant part in this arena. So, connection to Al-Qaeda, which was once much more significant. The Americans managed to assassinate some Al-Qaeda officials, and it also affected Israel. Al-Qaeda were looking for Israelis in Kenya, in East Africa. To that
שאני חושב שכן שכדאי לציין זה באמת הפעילות הסמויה של איראן, אם כבר אנחנו מדברים על מזרח אפריקה, אנחנו ראינו חשיפה של תאים של פעילות, תאים מקומיים.
So we're talking about local sales that Iranians operate in Uganda, Mozambique, and it's not Iranian, but when you dig deep inside, you see that there is major Iranian involvement through the Quds force, and there's no doubt that even Israel has multiple interests there. And the last thing that I want to say about the activity of Iran, they're trying to undermine Israeli influence in these states. They're trying to damage Israeli interests there. They're not trying to conceal it even. So it's very, very significant. Do you want to give some examples? Because it's a significant point here. Yes, we are familiar with the doctor discussed it. We are familiar with involvement in Kenya, Iranian involvement in Kenya through education, ties with the regime. We are also aware of it in Uganda, and this is just another aspect you have to take into consideration, because it's not that sexy, right? It's not. This is diplomacy par excellence that is damaging for Israeli foreign policy in this region. I just want to make a comment here. So there is an important thing here. We always focus on hard power, not soft power. There are many, many other problems, but this is the problem that I want to focus on. The significant problem is that we're not looking at the soft power efforts, which are very, very significant, because if we look at the threat, sometimes this is the major threats. The fact that, for example, the University of Mustafa in the Nation, and if we speak about, there's also strong connection to Hezbollah, because most of the Shia communities arrive from Lebanon. And even if we look at if we check who controls the religious centers, you see very clear connection to Hezbollah. But we need to focus on that more. But we should not ignore the soft power, because this is the basis that allows Iran its inactivity to conduct activity in the continent. But when you look at Iranian activity in Africa, you differentiated between soft power and hard power. So as far as the Iranians are concerned, what is their priority? And Matan mentioned it. So is it terrorism against Israel? Of course, it goes it goes hand in hand. But I want to focus on what is the chicken. That's a chicken and the egg. But first and foremost, it has to do with exporting the revolution. So first of all, why is Africa so attractive to Iran? Because it's countering the Western colonialism. So if you ask yourself, how come the Houthis collaborate with Al-Shabaab? So, and because at the end of the day, there is something bigger. So they resist together the Western impact. So that's why it has to do with ideology. And the Iranians place an emphasis on that. And it's relevant to Latin America and Asia and Europe, wherever there are Shias. So they want to create common interests, and they understand that the engine to do that is the Shia. It's through the Shia population. In places where there's Shia population, it's easier. We spoke about Nigeria and Ivory Coast and Senegal and of course Tanzania in East Africa. But in countries where there aren't any population, they're trying to make sure that it works as well. So there was this famous story of the Iranian diplomat who was expelled recently from Egypt, Moussaoui. He is the cultural attaché in Algeria. He was expelled in 2018 because he was trying to establish Shia cells. He was accused of supporting certain entities. So why is it so dominant? Because you have to remember that African states, there are so many conflicts, but you look for good enough munition, which will be good enough and cheap enough, so you will be able to use it in such a way that will change the battlefield. And the Iranians can offer that. They don't have many types, but they managed to do it in such a way that it is battle proven. Unfortunately, we're also part of this, but eventually you invest a little and you with great impact. So soft power is significant, but hard power, unfortunately, as I see it, this trend will only expand because there is willingness, there is vacuum, apropos the sanctions against the Russians, and this vacuum will be filled by Iranians' entity because they want to politically affect these states. So we'll see it expanding along the axis of time, over time. So with regards to Morocco and Algeria, it's a fascinating example how we became involved in that, we and the Iranians, and we brought about this connection or cutting the ties between these states. So I want to ask Matan something that I just thought about. It's not secret that when we look at our environment, is that the Iranians nowadays they're not in a good place as they used to be like 2 years ago because of everything that has happened during the war and the collapse of Assad and Hezbollah. And the big question in the African context with regards to hard power, will we see attempts on behalf of Iran to create access of smuggling of weapons like used to be in Sudan a decade ago or more than a decade ago? So yes, so will we see deepening of the hard power in Africa in light of the difficulties that the Iranians are facing in our region? So I think that, yes, it's definitely an option. We spoke a lot about Sudan. Sudan is again becoming an area where they're trying to use, to smuggle weapons to the Middle East through Egypt and Sinai. I think that Somalia itself is a hub for smuggling munition into Africa itself. hard power. I believe that in next years, in the coming years, in light of the results of the current war, Africa will become more significant to Iranians' foreign policy in the context of advancing terror and ammunition, right? Yes, I believe so. Look, Africa is a bit different in the sense that the religious aspect is not that significant as it is in the Middle East. Here we have so much to work with, the Shia and the Sunni, but in Africa, the religious aspect is not that significant, so I think that it will happen under the surface. We'll see it happening, but we will not definitely understand that it's the Iranians that are behind it. They'll do it through local entities that will be the ones that will execute it, but behind the scenes, there will be Iran. And I think Shabab is a wonderful example. So Shabab are also active in Kenya and other states. Dr. Abdi knows better than me. I won't be surprised if Shabab will be active in these states, supported by Iran, but it's never going to be out in the open, but because it doesn't serve Iranians' interest to be perceived as an entity that introduced instability to Africa, as in addition to the Middle East. So, Revital, you spoke about the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and my question is whether you identify other entities other than the Saudis that are trying to deal with the Iranians or to compete with the Iranians. Yes, please.
Okay, באמת אני
So, actually, I am focusing on this competition, this rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, but we already heard here about Turkish presence and Russian presence and other presence and Emiratis, etc. So there are many players in Africa that are dealing, that are competing over resources, over African economy, competing over UN votes, etc. So my focus is on these Middle Eastern powers. Yeah, but there is great competition. Yeah, great competition. Also, the Egyptians are also involved, right? Yes. So, I'm sorry, it's not Egyptians. It's a very passionate competition. So, if you ask the same question you just asked Matan about hard power, well, I don't see it coming as it is happening in East Africa now, but I believe that the competition is mostly over the attention and buying actually forming ties with the African states. Thank you so much. Danny, I'd like to ask you a question. You mentioned, so we talked about states that are more remote, and you mentioned Egypt, which is also part of Africa. So can you talk a little bit about the Egyptians-Iranians connection? For us as Israelis, we have peace with Egyptian, and it's very relevant to us. So first of all, I want to reassure you. So at the end of the day, I think the arrest of Moussaoui actually made it even clearer. I think that in Egypt there is understanding that Iran is dangerous. And obviously it's related to the Houthis, because the Houthis, the economic damage that they inflict to Egyptians is very significant, what they do in the canal. So I think that eventually we don't have to convince the Egyptians that Iranians are a threat. So on the Iranian side, they have this the Iranian leadership, they have this ongoing policy under Pezeshkian. They are trying to actually enhance the relationship, the ties of Iran in the region. They want to empower different states. They want to prevent normalization, but they really want to do that. So we actually see this obsession. So in the Egyptian context, we know what went on with Khan Khalili. So again, I think that we should keep our eyes open, but in the Middle East, it's not a zero-sum game. There are multiple examples from the Qatari who have great relationship with the Iranians, and even the Saudis. At the end of the day, I think that even if we see that Iran is getting closer to different states, it's not necessarily threatening Israel. We should not actually prevent ourselves from forming ties with different states because of Iran. And the Egyptians are a good example. So, of course, it doesn't actually, it's not an evidence for strategic policy. The Egyptians are very much aware of the Iranian threat, but the Israeli media, so it's either, it's for them, it's always black and white. So in this context, so the Saudis and the Iranians, so it's not a zero-sum game, as you said earlier. And I know that I'm a bit, I'm already asking something related to the next panel, but I must ask you, Matan, as far as Israel is concerned, what's the biggest concerns regarding the Iranians' involvement? It's quite clear that today what is going on in the area of the Red Sea and Mandel Babel, this is the most tangible thing, because we still hear the sirens, and this is the most urgent thing. But if we look at the bigger picture and strategically, I think that the challenge nowadays in East Africa is quite significant. It's a diplomatic challenge. It's also concealed. And I think that there Israel will be smart to place a bigger emphasis on it, because eventually we've seen that in Israel we focus more on Africa and East Africa, and I think that it's a very positive trend. But we have to make sure that the Iranians there that are looking for different ways, they don't enhance their influence. That we want to have to make sure that the Iranians' impact is not getting more significant. Maybe after the war, more attention will be given to new places, new areas that weren't a priority so far. I think that there is a challenges. That it's a challenge. So of course there is also South Africa, which is a great challenge for Israel. And the truth is that we didn't speak about it, but there is a branch of Iran called Hezbollah, which is very active in Africa, especially the West Coast, around drug dealings, where we have to pay attention to that as well, because whatever starts with Hezbollah is a great concern, and it affects stability, and we have to think about it really seriously. Yes. So I was asked, Dr. Abdi, if you want to sum up and to answer what they asked you.
Can you translate that so that I can?
If you want to summarize,
right.
To summarize and to answer on the questions that you asked. Okay.
Yes, I think just listening to the earlier, colleagues speak about the actors who are now, all of them engaged in the Horn of Africa, but also in the rest of Africa, just, I think, highlights several important factors. One, of course, is that we live in a highly geopolitical age when emerging powers are actually projecting power beyond their borders. We also have, I think, the largest concentration of nations you may actually classify as major powers, as actually middle powers. The Saudis actually hate middle powers. So if you go to Saudi Arabia, never use the word middle power to refer to Saudi Arabia. They actually think that they are a major power. So I don't know whether Israel prefers to be called a major power or a middle power. But I think the point is that we now have many countries who classify themselves as middle powers or major powers. I don't know whether you have been following this, but a number of countries in the Horn of Africa, from Ethiopia to Kenya, are now crafting or developing what they call grand strategy. And the purpose of developing the grand strategy is to align basically policy so that a nation cannot just project hard power, military power, but also can project soft power. So I think those are, I think, important ideas that Africa, even African states, are now beginning to develop their own middle power projection. So it's not just the external actors, the Gulf and the Middle East, projecting power, but also African states themselves learning and projecting, or rather counter-projecting this power. So those dynamic, I think, is important to understand. Political elites in the Horn of Africa and Africa in particular are extremely clever. They know how to play this game. And so there also needs to be that factor, that it's not just a malign external actor imposing their will on the Gulf, on the Horn of Africa, but also actors manipulating. For example, take the case of the conflict in Sudan, one of the most tragic and one of the costliest, deadliest conflict. I also remind people that actually today the deadliest conflict in the world is not actually Gaza, it is actually Sudan. It has displaced more people than any conflict, even past Ukraine. So why is this? If you look at Burhan and Hemeti, these are two powerful individuals. They are not creatures of the UAE or creatures of Egypt or external parties. They are also involved in counter manipulation. So I think that is important to understand. Another, I think, important geopolitical, idea. There was a comment. There was a very nice editorial commentary that came out on the foreign policy this week, which actually advances a very interesting hypothesis. It says we have now reached the peak of emerging and rising powers. All powers are now equal in their weakness. None can prevail upon the other. And I think this is an important factor to also understand, that there is a limit to how much these external actors can play. So we are beginning already to see that. It is actually a grinding stalemate in which no particular actor can actually prevail over the other or create an all-spectrum dominance. Take the example of the UAE. The UAE is now the number 3, I think, external actor in Africa. Basically, the largest now provider of aid to countries, bailout cash to countries, including my own country, Kenya. So the UAE has moved very rapidly up the hierarchy of the nations that are putting resources into Africa. But what are they getting good return for these resources? That is a question to ask. Take the example of Berbera. The UAE put substantial amount of money into Berbera, roughly 400 million. It is the most expensive port acquisition in the East African. There has been no return for because the initial idea was to hook in Ethiopia into Berbera. That project did not succeed because the Ethiopian government, for a variety of reasons, did not want to buy. So, in other words, the Emiratis, this is just an example to show that the Emiratis are throwing a lot of money, but they could be also overreaching because unless you have a clear investment strategy, clear political strategy, clear military security strategy, all these things could also fall apart. I'm not saying the Emiratis do not have a particular strategy, but all I'm saying is that many of these external actors are also operating, they are learning. And this is one important idea which I also want to throw around, that many of these actors are learning, and today's geopolitics is not very different from the geopolitics of the ancient times. One person, one of the colleagues, must be you, Doctor, who commented about the Turkey as now a sort of neo-Ottoman imperial power, which is actually fascinating. Because if you look at the way Turkey has projected power in Somalia, they are actually very proud of that neo-Ottoman heritage. The defense minister, when he visits Somalia, he actually brings a picture of the Ottoman Navy. In 2012, when the foreign minister of Turkey was given an opportunity to address Somali parliament, he actually was very clear. He said that we are all children of Ali Bey. And Ali Bey was an Ottoman, 16th century Ottoman Navy buccaneer who actually sadly had a tragic end. But it is very clear that Turkey sees Somalia as part of an old Ottoman empire, which it needs to basically consolidate as a sphere of influence. So I think those are ideas which I know I'm pressed for time. I don't want to, but just to highlight, I think clear idea that today we are almost reaching a peak of geopolitical competition. Too many actors involved in very small theaters are creating a glut, a sort of what do you call it, inflation. So this has brought no one can prevail over the other, and I think clearly. But just one last idea which I want to throw: the Israel Israel is technically a middle power or even a major power, because if you put its military potential and capabilities, but it has underplayed its hand in the Horn. It has underplayed its hand in East Africa and Africa, and I think it has now a good opportunity, hoping that the Gaza ceasefire will be sustained, and over the course of time, Israel will begin to rebuild, its prospects and its profile. I think it is clear that Horn of Africa is one theater where there are already significant support for Israel. And countries like Kenya, for example, Ethiopia, these are the two most important economies of the Horn, but also Tanzania. Tanzania is one of the most stable and also has increasingly, is a major food security partner for other East African communities. It's undergoing through an election. So East Africa, I think, remains a primary theater, and also it is a natural Red Sea arena theater for Israel. So I probably would ask Israel to be much more proactive in the coming years.